Just
while the intro's going on.
Look cool.
Just look cool and look moody. Yeah, I remember the lyrics. Secret plans, hidden treasure.
Fear of a Blank Planet.
Video games. Shopping.
Money and bitches. MOB.
School.
Yep, I'm doing well, thanks.
I mean, even if I'm playing the fuck ups, it'll be funny, you know, so.
Shall I do one of those?
So I think Fear of a Blank Planet in many ways is the archetypal Porcupine Tree record. I think it's what a lot of people think of when they think of the sound of Porcupine Tree. It's kind of defined and definitive on that record. To me, Porcupine Tree, the best work we did anyway, I think, at least the most important work to me, was this kind of combination of classic singer-songwriter sort of approach to writing songs, big heavy metal riffs, and the kind of ambient textural sound design. And I think that those three things combined is really the sound of Porcupine Tree. And Fear of a Blank Planet for me is the kind of zenith of that approach.
On this album there's a track called Anesthetize, which I think sums up Porcupine Tree sound. There's a long track in 3 parts. And I guess for a newcomer to the band, you could say, well, the first part has a kind of Radiohead feel. The middle part veers into metal, and the outro is quite Pink Floyd. So that usually gets people interested.
You know, without sounding like an estate agent, I would say, you know, classic, modern, contemporary blend with some electronic elements of surprise thrown in.
I think by the time we got to Fear of a Blank Planet, we'd really hit our stride as this group of people. This was the 3rd album that I was involved in. It was the moment that we really, all the best bits, all the assets that we'd got had come together.
This, for me, is actually the album I would probably recommend anyone listen to if they want to understand what we're about. It had a great concept, so I felt like I had a strong direction lyrically. It created all sorts of visual directions that we could go in with the artwork and the videos and the live films as well. It all came from a book I read on a beach somewhere. I was on holiday somewhere with my partner at the time, I think Spain or something. Whenever I go on holiday, because I don't like the sun, I just spend the whole time in the shade reading books. I was already a big Bret Easton Ellis fan. I'd been a big fan of American Psycho, Rules of Attraction, Less Than Zero, and he published a new book called Lunar Park. And I read it on a beach on holiday, and it really hit home for me because it was all of the classic Bret Easton Ellis tropes about sort of terminally bored kids, terminally bored teenagers.
It's just this massive disconnect of this new generation. So I think it's a very, very strong concept.
You know, everything that an elder generation looks at the younger generation and thinks, oh God, these bloody kids, you know, as our parents did at us and their parents did at them. You know, oh, the music's just a bunch of noise. It's that sort of thing. Maybe that's because we were already at parent age writing about teenagers.
It was all about the idea of blank planet. It's a generation of people that can't interact, don't have any empathy, don't know how to behave, don't have any boundaries because they've seen things that perhaps they shouldn't see. And then prescription drugs and ADHD, all those kind of subjects are kind of woven into the narrative.
All of those things were kind of floating around my mind, and this is 2006. I was writing the lyrics and a lot of the music for the record. And so a lot of that came from this Bret Easton Ellis book. And that all kind of channeled into the Fear of a Blank Planet album. Certainly the title track and also the long track Anaesthetize all comes from Bret Easton Ellis, really.
Smashing things up, playing with guns, taking drugs, you know, they're like 13 years old. And that's very well represented in the Fear of a Blank Planet video that Lasser did. He really captured what the lyrics were all about.
This sense of becoming detached from the gift of life through technology, through things that supposedly are to make our lives easier or to entertain us. Television, cinema, drugs, alcohol, pornography. And of course now the internet and social media has created a proliferation of content, of everything, all of those things I just mentioned. This issue that the more you have, the less you engage deeply with any of it. I think it's been around probably since the Industrial Revolution, probably going back beyond that, you know. And I think there are always people, probably in previous eras, it would have been through literature and maybe through poetry and painting that people reflected this. But it's obviously become one of the main things that musicians and filmmakers like to focus on. Our relationship with the world around us and the other people in our species, and our relationship with other species on Earth too. I think these are all, you know, very, very topical things, because I don't think anybody can stand back and say it's going well. You just can't.
It's very much a comment on these times, as it was, 15 years ago. So, of course, now we have AI thrown into the mix, but that just becomes part of the bigger picture, and I think it's very relevant. It's what we're kind of facing there, the kind of social structures that we're used to are being broken down.
It's a theme of people being fed one particular thing and, you know, being stuck on it and coming out as a result of that process, not having the usual influences that maybe we had, you know, not just being able to put down a computer and go outside in the simplest sense, you know. They're sort of trapped in this vortex of boredom and prescription drugs and you know, computer gaming all night, you know.
Increasingly, I think those things become things that people like myself want to write about. But of course, the other side of that coin is that a lot of pop music chooses not to engage with things like that anymore. A lot of pop music now, increasingly modern pop, becomes about what to me are much more kind of shallow, trivial things. Because that's, again, a reflection of the world we live in now. People don't engage with rock and pop music the way they used to. So therefore, pop and rock music becomes more banal in what subject matter it chooses to deal with. Which is a shame, because I think pop and rock music are capable of embodying a lot more and being a lot more deep than a lot of modern pop music. Obviously not being able to observe it as closely as I can now, and I see all the issues with my own stepchildren now, of course, too, much closer. But I was aware. I mean, how could you not be aware? So I was writing from a position of ignorance. But the other thing I'd say is I've written songs about all sorts of things that I've never experienced firsthand. You know, I've written about nuclear war. I've never been in a nuclear war, God forbid. I've written about drug culture. I've never been particularly into it myself. But you can write about those things from a more of a kind of observer's perspective. And I think that's what I was doing on Fear of a Blank Planet, yeah. I was living in Tel Aviv at the time, and so that's a whole different environment and set of inspirations, and the input changes, then the output changes. So I'm sure there's an element of that too. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what that would be, but I'm sure it definitely made a difference. For me, if I've got a strong lyrical strand, it really, really helps. It really helps. Very often, like with the last Porcupine Tree album, Closure Continuation, for example, all the music was written before I had any idea what the lyrics were going to be. And it's hard. If the concept is strong and the lyrical strand is strong, it becomes this kind of symbiotic thing where little fragments of music are being suggested by the lyrics and then vice versa. And I wouldn't say it becomes easy, but it certainly becomes a lot easier for me.
My Ashes, there's this really nice kind of last chorus. Can I read some? I've never done this before. And my ashes find a way beyond the fog and return to the child that I forgot. And my ashes fade among the things unseen, and a dream plays in reverse on piano keys. And my ashes drop upon a park in Wales, never-ending clouds of rain and distant sails. I love that. It's great. Really evocative.
Musically speaking, it was kind of continuing a path that we'd taken, increasing more and more metal into the sound. Now, interestingly, at this time we'd signed with Roadrunner, a bona fide metal label.
I first became aware of the band around the time of the In Absentia and Deadwing albums, and I do remember meeting their then manager Andy Leff at our UK office at the time, and we got on really, really well. We bonded over our love of 70s live albums, and maybe he saw some way that Roadrunner and his team could broaden the band's audience. But Stephen had already worked with Opeth in the mid-2000s to great success, and some more heavier elements were starting to creep into the band's music, so it kind of made sense at the time. Always been a massive, massive progressive rock fan. It's what turned me onto music in the first place. But since maybe the early 80s, it's been difficult finding progressive music that really gets me excited. And I think Porcupine Tree were one of those bands that came along at the right time. They already had an easily identifiable signature sound, great musicianship, but at the bottom of everything was amazing songs. Stephen is just an incredible writer, an absolutely incredible writer.
And I'm not suggesting that encouraged me to incorporate more metal into the sound. I think the opposite was probably true, because the band were moving more towards a metal, having metal a big part of our sound. We kind of attracted the interest of a metal label. The audience was reflecting more of a metal crowd as well. We were doing metal festivals. It's the first time musically, it's the first time I was tuning the guitars down to C. And I think that was partly because we'd been on tour with a band called Oceansize opening for us. And I'd seen the guys in Oceansize tuning their guitars down to C. The lowest I'd ever been was D. So I'd been doing drop D for ages. And then I saw these guys Oceansize and they're dropping their guitars down to C. Wow, it's heavy.
Because Stephen was into detuning his guitar, so I needed to get underneath that really. It's still a 4-string bass, but I down-tuned the strings so that it's like the bottom 4 of a 5-string bass, for any bass nerds out there. I don't know, I think it was more or less a happy accident. It was something that I was experimenting with at the time, and then when I heard the demo for Anesthetize with those big heavy riffs on it, I thought, oh, I can use that there.
So I was experimenting with going lower with the tunings, which made us sound even more, metal in some respects.
There's a whole subculture that goes with heavy metal and heavy music that really Porcupine Tree was never part of. So, we'd turn up at these Hellfest or something, and you think, well, are these people going to think we're just sort of charlatans? But, and I think with the music, I think going on after sort of Mastodon or something somewhere, I remember that and thinking, well, they're going to hate us. And they didn't.
Vocally, I'm never going to be a metal singer. I don't want to be a metal singer. So it was always about finding the way to fuse these two worlds, the big riffs and with my voice and the songwriting and the ambient stuff. So to me, it felt like everything had been leading towards this album.
Stone in the mall, the kids play, and in this way I wish away each day.
We did have a short tour planned, and I believe it was 14 dates in Europe and 6 dates in America.
We really need to go and do this tour. We've been pressured to do this tour, but we really don't want to play that repertoire again. Why don't we play the new record? And then somebody else would have said...
And I was reading this book by Paul Arden called Whatever You Think, Think the Opposite. And there's a lot of value to doing that, because if you always do the thing that you've always done, the outcome will be very predictable. If you do the opposite, you open up a whole unknown world of what might happen. And that's exciting.
So we would have had this conversation, and at the end of it we would have thought to ourselves, nothing to lose. It can only be a positive thing in terms of when we do finally get to record it, we'll have worked through the material.
I said, you know what, why don't we just play the whole record, all 6 songs, and we'll ask the audience not to record it and not to film it, even though they did. And we'll test it in front of the audience.
All round, it was a good idea. What we were worried about was how the audience would react to that, but it was fantastic. I mean, they were so supportive.
And it was a great thing because the songs always evolve. So how they started off in the demo to how they were at the end of 20 shows was already quite noticeably different.
Because one of the problems with obviously making a record very often is you make it, then you go out and tour, and by the end of the tour you're playing it in a much more confident way. You've explored the material, you've had ideas that you'd never had before when you were kind of working on it in the studio, by virtue of just going out and playing it every night in front of a live audience and relaxing into it and allowing yourself to improvise with material a bit. So the whole theory was, if we do that, by the time we actually record it, we'll have kind of lived in this world of Fear of a Blank Planet. We'll have lived the material and we'll be able to make it better when we record it.
It allowed Gavin, Steve and Colin to kind of fine tune what they were doing with the tracks, find the best way of performing them, and make arrangement adjustments as well. It was also great to see the kind of reaction we were going to get, which gave an indication of how well these tracks translated to the stage.
You know, you can rehearse the songs a million times, but when you play it in front of an audience, living on the adrenaline, you pick up reaction from the audience.
Really, the main reason that I remember we all decided it was a great idea was we'd all got comfortable, we could get comfortable with the music before we recorded it, which is something that I think maybe had been missing from the previous record. And we didn't do it to sort of attract people to the concerts. We did it for ourselves. We did it because we wanted to make the record as strong as possible.
The first show we played, Fear of a Blank Planet, was a small club up in Cambridge called, I think it's called The Junction. Scary. No idea how it's going to go across. No idea what people are going to make of it. It's a big thing to walk out and say to the audience, right, we're going to play an hour of material you've never heard before now, and an hour of material we've never performed, even in the studio, let alone in front of an audience. Scary, really scary. But by the end of that first show, it was like, it's going to work. And that may not have been the case. That may not have been the case. You know, you just don't know. People, you know, have a hard time sometimes understanding something that's completely new and alien to them. But fuck, isn't that what people used to do? Isn't that what people did in the 60s and the 70s? And, you know, before everyone got paranoid about social media? And in fact, the funny thing was, I think a lot of the fans were quite respectful. And I think I could see, probably by the third song, I could see, yeah, this is going over, this is connecting. Yeah.
Usually if you say, right, the first half is all going to be new material, sometimes an audience's heart sinks and they just want, oh, can you just play the old stuff? But no, they were really up for it. Probably one of the best periods of touring we did.
Some sections became lengthened, some things were chopped out, and you know, but I think that it was just more developed.
Fear of a Blank Planet, after the tour, Steve came up with a whole different ending. So recently I was doing some mix work on one of those shows. We recorded one of those shows in Saarbrücken.
Struggling with the material, we're still struggling to master it, we're still struggling to play it, we're still finding it. There are whole lyrical passages that are still missing. Some of the guitar playing, certainly from me, is really not very tight. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. Some of the solos, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. But it's fascinating to me to realise how much, probably from the beginning of that tour to the end, we would have, I wouldn't say mastered the material, but we would have probably tamed it by the end of the tour.
And I was mixing it the other day and I thought, oh my God, the whole end is different. After we did the tour, Steve said, you know, there's a section that I think I've got another idea for this ending, which is much better.
Don't try to be like you don't mind. You feel no sun. You steal a gun to kill time.
But as is true with any band and any set list, I think the band play it better at the end of the tour than they do at the beginning. From a personal point of view, you just find better ways to play it, you find better drum fills, you find smoother ways to transition from one section to another, and it just evolves in a much more organic way, you know.
And it's something, again, never did before, never done since. I would love to do it again. I would love to do it again, actually. In fact, I should do it again. When we did the tour to play Fear of a Blank Planet prior to recording it, there was a whole section in Anaesthetize where nothing much happened. It was kind of this section that I kind of imagined, I think I imagined there would always be a solo there, but it wasn't a solo I could imagine myself playing. I didn't know what to play there. There was an opportunity for me to connect with Alex. I think a journalist interviewed me and he said, oh, I just interviewed Alex yesterday. He was saying how much he's a big Porcupine Tree fan. And I was like, really? Because there's this section on this album, I don't know who's going to play the solo on it. He could be perfect. He connected me with Alex. Alex played the solo and nailed it. It was obvious that this was meant to be, and he did a great job, and obviously it's now kind of iconic solo, and every guitar player that plays that on stage has to basically play Alex's solo, because it's such a, you know, like a lot of Alex solos, it's a solo, but it also has a beautiful sense of structure and melody to it in itself. And I say that because a lot of guitar solos just becomes a kind of exercise in technical expertise, and that's the beauty of Alex Lifeson, is that his solos always were so beautifully realised and beautifully constructed and served the song. And his solo in Anaesthetize is a great example of a solo that serves the song. Nil Recurring was the mini album of stuff that was basically, I want to say, left over from Fear of a Blank Planet, which makes it sound that they were they were not good enough somehow. And there's an element of that, certainly with Cheating the Polygraph, as we already mentioned. I think we felt it wasn't quite gelling the way that some of the tracks on the album were. There were other tracks that just didn't fit in with the jigsaw puzzle. So to me, it's like when you make a record, it's not necessarily about putting all your best tracks on the record, it's about finding the way to put all the scenes together that makes the most logical sense of journey, sense of story. So again, like a movie, sometimes a movie director has to cut their favourite scene because it just slows the movie down or whatever. And I think it's the same with making a record. The whole EP, I think, was a great companion to the main album. And I love bands that they make records, yeah, but they also put out EPs and singles as well.
We did some of those working as a band together. So tracks like What Happens Now, we did. Started that off in the studio, I can remember that.
It was a jam, actually, right here in this room. The four of us were here, and I don't know, day 2 or day 3, thought, okay, what we're going to do today? And I said, look, I've got this idea to make a little percussion loop, and I have this thing. It's called a Remo sound shape, and it's almost like a little toy thing. It's a pre-tuned skin with its own spring hanging out the back, which effectively sounds like a cheap reverb, okay? And so I played a little pattern, I don't know, something like this. And I made a 4-bar loop of it. In fact, I played it twice in stereo. And we made a 4-bar loop of this sort of weird percussion thing. And that was the start of What Happens Now.
So one of the things I was doing at this time, I was writing a lot in my apartment in Tel Aviv at the time. And I was trying to challenge myself a bit, you know, on the guitar, because I'm not the best guitar player, but I like sometimes to write parts that are really hard to play because it makes me get better. It makes me, you know, oh, I need to practice that, you know. And so the one I wrote for this song called Normal, I kind of made a rod for my own back because it's, at least for me, it's really hard to play accurately on stage every night. I'm going to play it slowly because it's been 15 years since I played it, but the main riff, which is a capo here, which is on the 5th fret, I think. It might have been a different fret, but anyway, we'll do it on the 5th fret, is like this.
Gavin wrote Cheating the Polygraph with Stephen. I mean, that for me is that's a standout track of that EP.
Now, the original set list had Cheating the Polygraph in it instead of Way Out of Here. Way Out of Here was a song we'd written, but we didn't think it belonged on the album. And when we played Cheating the Polygraph to the audience, when we got back, we thought, nah, maybe that one isn't right, and Way Out of Here is a bit stronger.
So Cheating the Polygraph didn't even make the record. And I think it probably would have been on the record if we hadn't toured it first. It's one of those things where you kind of play it in front of an audience, you realise there's something about this track that isn't quite connecting with the audience in the way the rest of the material is. So by the end of the tour, we were like, yeah, that's not good enough, that track.
Sometimes you can have a great piece of music, but it just might not be right for the album. You have to make those sort of decisions. But, you know, we had the Neil recurring EP, and that allowed these tracks to have a high profile as well.
So Gavin, by this time, was pretty bedded in. I mean, the Dead Wing was the first album where he was actually a full member of the band. By Fear of a Blank Planet, he was completely immersed in the world of Porcupine Tree. He was a very vocal contributor, certainly to the arrangements and everything. And you can hear his interest in polyrhythms particularly as becoming a fundamental aspect of what we do.
So there's quite a few what I call rhythmic illusions on the album, something I've been into for a long time. The effect that you can, by knowing what the audience is expecting, you can mislead them a little bit and cause some rhythmic ambiguity. Now, there's a really good one at the start of the song Sentimental. A lot of people think the rhythm that Steve is playing on the piano is dead straight time, and that would give you some very odd bar lengths like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can see people nodding their head in the audience when we play this live. What is actually happening is a sort of metric modulation, is what we'd call it, based off a dotted eighth note or 3/16. So it is all in 4, and I'll tap 4 through it now. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's where the drums come in. The drums are playing in 16ths, but even the drum pattern is a little bit of an illusion as well. But it's, you know, it's kind of fun to watch people in the audience think, oh, it's the wrong way round. And then when the song gets going, there's a moment of, oh, I see, I've heard it completely wrong.
The rhythm he came up with was Sentimental, which is a very beautiful ballad, but it's this kind of 3/4 feel the whole way through. So you hear the piano start, and then the drums come in, and it takes you a few moments to understand the relationship between the two things. And me and Gavin both share this love of that kind of musical principle, where you have two things that don't necessarily make sense when your ear first alights on them, but then your brain makes sense of it, and it becomes this really fascinating groove. So Gavin brought that in spades to the band.
The track Sentimental really became something more than I thought it was going to be. And actually I really enjoy playing that. It kind of built more and more layers onto it, and it just became this really beautiful track.
I've always kind of been the piano player in Porcupine Tree, and the reason for that is simple, is that because I predominantly wrote the songs, and I wrote on piano and acoustic guitar, and I enjoyed it. You know, I enjoyed the diversity of playing guitar on one song and then piano on the next, and it's continued to this day. So I've not done a gig since where I haven't at least been sitting down at the piano for at least 2 or 3 songs, and it started on that tour out of necessity, really, just to free Richard up to be the guy doing all the interesting stuff.
Technically, it's a case of finding the space, finding the right frequencies, and also with the sound design, finding the right atmosphere. Again, I listen to the lyrics quite closely, and I tend to give a nod to the lyrics. It's quite subtle, but I think they're things that Stephen picks up on. Probably around this time, I was working with Roland on the V-Synth, and I was using that a lot. And the intro to Way Out of Here, there's a lot of kind of choral and swirling voices and kind of atmospheric kind of confusion of sounds almost. When I use these voices, I always think of Ligeti, and I always try to get these clashing voices. And that worked very well. And then in the chorus, there's quite a strong lead line that I think informed some of the other parts as well that I used that for.
There's a song on Fear of a Blank Planet called Way Out of Here, which was written after we did the tour. And it's the only song that made the album that hadn't been written at the point that we did the pre-album premiere of this new work. And Way Out of Here was written after the tour because during that tour I met a mum whose daughter had been a massive Porcupine Tree. Her name was Ariel. She'd been a massive Porcupine Tree fan. She was about 15 or 16 years old, and she'd been killed on a train track. She came to the show and she wanted to meet me. She wanted to meet the band to tell me the story of her daughter. And it did have a very profound effect on me because in some ways she was exactly the demographic that I was writing this album about. This idea of this girl wandering around the train tracks, listening to Porcupine Tree on her iPod, as it would have been at the time, just kind of stuck in my mind, and getting hit by the train and the tragedy of that and the heartbreak of that. And it did have a very profound effect on me, and I went away and wrote the song, or at least wrote the lyrics to the song Way Out of Here, which was actually a group composition musically, but I wrote the lyrics to the song. So then the lyric became a very literal interpretation, really. So Lasse cast this girl who looked very similar to Ariel. It became very literal to the point that I wanted Ariel's mother, I wanted her to see the video and say it was okay before we actually screened it, because I didn't want to cause her any distress. And she was fine with it. I think part of her was very happy that her daughter's life had been immortalised in a song by one of her favourite bands, so that was amazing to her. But yes, I mean, it was obviously a very touchy thing to create this video and not knowing whether it would cause distress or not, but she was very happy to do it in the end.
Her mother came to one of the shows in the States. Well, we didn't show that film that evening, and I think Stephen said a few words for her daughter. So actually going back to the other questions, that's probably the most emotional part of the being on stage during that tour, yeah. And so, yeah, that was very quite difficult, I guess, for everybody.
I felt he really surpassed himself with with anaesthetize, with the the 3-part thing, and especially the middle section, because there's loads of ideas in that. And also it felt a bit like something he hadn't done before. So when I first heard it, I thought, oh wow, that's really, it really grabbed me immediately, and it became a bit of a live favourite. So we played that a lot, and it always went down really well.
It had this wonderful sense of drama, and it had a cinematic quality to it. You know, one of the things I do a lot is draw this analogy between filmmaking and writing a complicated, longer song. And my fans have always liked the long songs anyway, because it's seen as one of the fundamental things about the progressive rock tradition, is to write these long songs. And I've always held this analogy very dear of the long song as analogous to a short film or a piece of cinema, and this kind of idea of having scenes within a song. So in a movie you have a scene where the characters are all happy, then you have a scene where something tragic happens, and then you have the aftermath of that, the loss and the regret, and these are very different things which happen within a film. And a lot of rock and pop music doesn't have that. A lot of rock and pop music, the song's either a happy song, or a negative song, or an angry song, or a song about regret, or a song about love, or a song about loss, whatever it is, and that's it, that's the song, it's about that. Movies don't have that. Movies have these constantly shifting feelings. Happiness followed by tragedy, followed by regret, followed by loss, followed by love, followed by hate. And I've always loved the idea that you can do all that in a song too, but it has to be a long song, and it has to be a song which has different scenes within it. And Anaesthetize, I think, is probably, of all the Porcupine Tree songs that were more extended, is in some ways the peak, the pinnacle of that. In the world of Porcupine Tree, is the pinnacle of that approach for us. It's got everything in 17 minutes.
It's become one of the band's most popular live tracks, and as I said before, it goes through many changes, and it kind of represents what Porcupine Tree do.
Well, you shouldn't really say this about progressive rock, but it was absolutely immediate for me. I mean, on the first listen, I totally got the impression that this was something really, really special. And I honestly felt that it was by far the best thing that the band had ever done up to that point. Yeah, as I say, it's just a stunning record.
I love Sleep Together. I tell you what I love about it is it's got theatre about it. It's got something about it which is very dramatic. It's quite simple. You know, it's very simple. Compared to a lot of Porcupine Tree tracks, it's very simple. Rhythmically, it's very simple. Harmonically, it's very simple. But it's dramatic. It's got a sense of the epic about it, which just makes it a really powerful way to end a show. Every time we've played it with Porcupine Tree and on my solo tours, it's always been the end of the main set. It's almost like you can't follow that. You can't follow that. It's big, it's dramatic, it's epic, and it just lends itself well to the live context.
Band won a Classic Rock Award in 2007. And we were completely blown away by the fact that they achieved this. There was some very strong competition that year, as I remember. One of the things that did become very apparent as soon as we signed the band was that they had a very, 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 very hardcore fan base. Consequently, a very sizable number of people went out and bought it on release, and that gave us the chart position. I think Deadwing charted just inside the top 100, but getting to 31 was, I think, a great achievement.
At the time, I thought it was the best record we'd made. I was really positive about it when it came out. I thought, you know, it was a really good chance to do well. I felt it was going to do well, and I think it did. You know, I think it was our best-selling record, perhaps. And at the time, you know, the slow uphill, had meant that we were reaching people way outside of the sort of niche progressive rock genre or the sort of space rock fans that were, you know, right at the beginning.
I have three albums that are at the peak for Porcupine Tree, which is In Absentia, Fear of a Blank Planet, and Closure Continuation, the last album we made. I think those three stand out for me, and overall, if somebody put a gun to my head and I had to choose one, then it would be this one. I think is probably the best. But as I say, I think those three are separated for me and at the very top.
I think it's one of the best albums that we did. And as I said at the beginning, I think we had just found our stride. We were kind of all on the same page at that point. You know, with many bands, and I've always thought this about Porcupine Tree, the best thing about Porcupine Tree is that we're all coming from such different places. And that's also the worst thing about Porcupine Tree. It's really hard to agree on anything because you're pulling it in all different shapes, you know, in all different, oh, you want to go there, and so we're all pulling it in different directions. I think Fear of a Blank Planet was probably the time that we were most alike in our tastes and our ambitions and how we wanted to go at the record at that point. And it was a very strong theme. The lyrics Stephen had come up with, the films that Lasser had done, there really was a strong theme to the whole album that had a unifying kind of element, and it gave a big focus to the record and the tour.
In my opinion, it's still their strongest record that they've ever released. The analogy that I kind of work with is that it's kind of their Dark Side of the Moon. Not that it's in any way similar to that record, but just in the way that I think it's always going to be revered as like their finest hour.
Probably the peak of what Porcupine Tree produce in the studio and on stage.
I still think it's a really strong record, and I think the way we went about recording it and performing it, that was all right for the time. I was really happy that we did that.
I mean, I like the other albums too, but this one had really got something driven. We were inspired, you know.
And in some ways that was the problem, because I don't think we could there was nowhere else for us to go after that. It's almost like we painted ourselves into a corner with this record. I don't feel like there was anything left to say with that particular musical vocabulary, having done Fear of a Blank Planet, which is a great problem to have. It means you've created something, you know, definitive. I think it's just us at our best doing what we did best.